Hello, folks. Welcome to the Casual Causal Talk, episode 5. Today, we have with us Dr. Robson Tigre, a very renowned voice in the causal inference world. He works for one of the largest companies in South America, Mercado Livre. He's a PhD in economics and an interesting figure who has transitioned, his skills of, econometrics to commercial banking, commercial marketing, and he has also written a lot of rich research papers. Robson, first of all, congratulations on your wedding and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I was invited and to the show, to the podcast, and I said, well, I'm about to leave on vacations. Can we do it some weeks later? And now here we are in my first week back. So thank you for the congratulations, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm also surprised to be here because on LinkedIn, which is the main platform I use, I don't post many posts in English, but I try to interact in English with other people that are influential, such like you and the people on the causal inference community over there. So thank you very much to open this space for me.
Yeah, welcome, Robson. Actually, what I do is, I kind of use the LinkedIn's translate feature, and that's how, I translate your Portuguese post into English. And I have found your post, to be really insightful. And, some of my friends here in India and South Asia, have told them to follow you, and they're also, pretty pleased with all the content that you post out there.
Thank you very much. I'm also fond of your content.
Yeah, thank you. As a prep to this podcast, I was snooping around on your LinkedIn profile, your website, your Medium articles, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that I really found striking is the words, I use experiments in causal inference to help teams move from opinion to evidence. I kind of, rec- uh, I kind of connect with that because I also believe that, causal inference kind of helps you move from the, predictive realm to the deterministic realm. Can you talk more about this particular sentence that you have on your website?
Sure. Yeah, it's really cool that you do your research before inviting people. So thank you for all of this attention. Um, since you congratulated me on my wedding, I must tell you on honeymoon I went to Egypt, and in
Nice.
Egypt I saw many like monuments that were built because people believed in something.
Mhm.
And for instance, part of the culture tried to praise the floods of the Nile River each year, which they could kind of predict, and they attributed it to a deity, a goddess. And it was a nice outcome because the floods helped like agriculture and so on and so forth. So they had this belief or this prevailing opinion that they should please deities in order to get better floods and nourish the grounds and have a nice crop this year. So, well, it made sense to them, but they never tried not to please the deity to see whether or not the next flood would be good or bad. So it was an opinion, untested opinion, and it relates to how people operate nowadays on business. They have a prevailing opinion, it makes sense, they can predict that if I do this, it will be followed by that. But they do not try to validate whether this is causal or correlational. And well, all of this storytelling is just to say that like managers, directors, and so on, they kind of hold on to an opinion, to a prevailing belief. They never test it. And they're basically doing what ancient civilizations did, uh, while now we have the technology and the data to say, hey, what if we experiment acting in another way? What outcome are we going to get? Is it going to be better or not? So I believe that this phrase, at least in my mind before I wrote it, it was like, well, I would like to help businesses, I believe you feel the same, achieve their full potential in the direction that they set. And basically that's why I tried to build this motto of this branding for myself.
Great. Uh, I know we talked about, causal methods even before defining it. So I ask all my participants to kind of define causality in three levels of difficulty. This is inspired from the Wyatt's 5 level. So the three levels are, explaining causality to grandma, explaining causality to a college fresher, and explaining causality to a causal expert. Of course, when I say grandma, I just assume that she doesn't know anything about
Okay.
econometrics or causality. But if she knows, due respect to her, just want to lay that out clearly here. So please go ahead and
Okay.
give it your shot.
Okay. By chance, I was raised by my grandmother, and I would explain it to her like, well, causal inference is how we try to figure out whether or not the soup you make me uh, helps me get better when I'm sick, when I have a flu, or not, or is it just correlational? It happens that when I'm sick, you give me chicken soup, and I get better because it's like a trend. Like there is a cycle in a flu, you're going to get better anyways, and so on. So what I do in my work is try to validate those links that we have in our mind that this causes that. So for that, we would like design an experiment in which some people get the chicken soup and some other people don't get the chicken soup while they're sick, and to measure at the end of the day whether the group who got the chicken soup is going to be better than the other group. So for the grandma, it's easier, but when you go to the causal expert level, there are different definitions of causality, so it's going to get harder and harder. But let's proceed.
Yeah, I think the chicken soup example was really great. There's also a famous book, right? Chicken Soup for the Soul. But I think if you add
Yeah.
causal inference to it, it becomes much more sweeter.
Okay, I didn't know about the book, but
It's a
it's a
pretty
good
old book,
title.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah, Robson. So you are a PhD in economics, right? And how has the experience been in terms of using causal methods for econometrics, social sciences versus a commercial industry setting?
Uh, let's see your point. Let me see. I saw that you interviewed Mateus Facuri,
Yes.
right? I'm a huge fan of him. We interacted sometimes in workshops, and I bought his book. I have it here, and I happen to have it. I'm sorry, it's blurred, but I happen to have it autographed by him. So
Oh, nice.
I'm a really fan of this
Okay.
person who tries to digest the concepts of causal inference for all of us. And in one another podcast, he mentioned that, well, the branch in which we work in data science should be also understood as decision science, because we are here to help people make better decisions, right? And it's a line in whatever setting you're going to work. Is it you were working in academia writing papers, you were trying to like indicate the way to policymakers to make better policies? If you are in a company, you are trying to give your stakeholders directions to make better policies. Like when you write a paper about conditional cash transfers, whether or not they increase education attainment of children, you want to know uh, whether it has an effect and why it works. Like, okay, children are going to school because if they do not, they're not going to receive the transfer. And if they go to school, they happen to be vaccinated and so on and so forth. La, la, la. Well, I worked on that, and now I work on, well, let's see whether and why give any specific tools, for instance, or live support to our sellers. Because I work on a marketplace. For those who are not familiar with Mercado Livre, is a marketplace such as Amazon or others that you might happen to know. And well, let's see for policies in which we have an opinion that we are helping our sellers, they really happen to help those sellers. Because if they sell more and they increase their revenue, we are also going to increase our revenue because we have a fee for operating in the companies. So basically, the goal is the same, but the time you have to do an analysis in academia, like a project, takes 1 year, and you happen to have access to other peers that are also in this cycle of research. You have time to use state-of-the-art approaches, but at the same time, you are far from decision making. You cannot go to the Congress, or you can, but you don't have the full access to go to the Congress and say, hey, I found this evidence, you should implement it, this policy. And in business, you have access to decision makers. They are like next to you in the office, but they want results in a week because your competitor is implementing a similar policy and you want to know whether you should keep investing on it or get this whole bunch of money and do something else new. So you have less time, you don't get to be super rigorous, and people are going to get frustrated if you come up with unclear results. There are a lot of papers with results that, okay, there's no evidence. We can't have an evidence on that. But in business, you have to happen. You happen to have a a gray explanation to something. They're going to say, well, I need a yes or no. Go back to R or to Python and try to investigate that. So basically, that's the difference between those two words.
Great. You showcased one book. A couple of days back, I just noticed that you are also planning to publish a book with the title Everyday Causal Inference. So my question is, do you think we human beings are, causality seeking by nature? You mentioned about, Egypt, and I also, want to visit such, ancient places like the Incas in South America, and Peru and everything. I mean, if you look at all those ancient civilizations, they try to make sense of their environment and they try to somehow, answer a causal question, right? Why do certain, seasons happen, and why do certain stars align certain way, at a certain time of the year? And perhaps these pyramids are, indicative of certain star alignments. I'm not an expert, but I've heard such things on, on Discovery Channel and National
Uh-huh.
Geographic. So what's your take on that? Do you think we human beings are, causality seeking by nature?
I do. I do. First of all, you talked about the book, and it's on a work in progress. I'm working on it, and the idea, like you mentioned, the everyday causal inference title, and yeah, I do linking those two topics, the book and the other question. I do believe we are data-driven beings by nature. Like people saw the fluids and they tried to connect it to something and how to make some intervene to make some action upon this. So I believe that we look for data to validate our hypothesis, but most of us don't have access on how to perform the analysis that is going to validate or refute a hypothesis, right? So the objective of the book is just to digest this even more than Mateus did in his excellent book, but for people on consumer experience, user experience, human resources, and people who would read it, understand how to apply the methods, how to make sense of this, and how to validate it. So uh, let's hope it works that way. Because you asked afterwards, like, are we causality seeking by nature? And I believe that yes. Yes, fundamentally, yes. I think that's how we learn things, is basically uh, testing hypothesis. And my wife shared a viral video here in Brazil that is a baby in the living room. And this baby, the mother just saw that the baby was enrolled in a swimming class. But the baby is in the living room making the same movement it did on the pool. And you can
Oh,
see in the face of the baby that he or she is puzzled, that it's not moving forward. It's trying to swim, but it's not moving forward. So at this point, I believe that the baby found out the difference between correlation and causation. Like when I happen to move forward on the pool like this, uh, when I did this action, I moved forward on the pool, but it's not working here on the ground. Why is it? How do I get to move forward on the ground? Right? So I believe that since we are babies, we are little scientists testing cause and effect in everyday life. And the difference is that causal inference, which Julia Pearl writes in the Book of Why, is a new science, is that now we have a structured way of thinking on how to validate whether more complex questions than, oh, how do I move forward? No, let's see whether this vaccine works. Now I have a proper way of how to investigate it. So summing up, yes, I think we're fundamentally causal beings.
great. Thanks for explaining. And I think the title of the book is really great, Everyday Causal Inference. And I also saw the title cover or the image, of the dog. It's pretty interesting, captivating, I must say. And I look forward to, the release of your book. And I'm sure, all your viewers also be really anxious to, get a hold of this book.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So moving on to, your profile, I just noticed that you have published a lot many research papers. As you know, I apply causal inference methods to the field of marketing. But in my free time, I like to read about, causal methods application in other domains as well. For example, economics, social sciences, epidemiology, etc. So I just want to pick your brain on one of your research papers, if I may. That research paper is titled Corruption and Economic Growth in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I just read a bit. I could infer that you're talking about, bi-directional causality. Can you, explain a little bit about this paper and how it is, bi-directional causality there?
Sure, sure. Uh, we are going to talk about causal methods in some minutes, I believe. But I should let our viewers know that this paper is a more exploratory paper. There's no way to find like this value is by how much corruption affects growth. This disclaimer made, the paper tries to say, well, corruption happens, and we see a lot of poor countries with prevailing corruption, and we see rich countries which we believe have lower levels of corruption. So let's test this relationship because we would like to make it more actionable on how to fight corruption would help societies like grow. And the problem there was that, well, couldn't it be that we are corrupt because we are poor instead of we are poor because we are corrupt, right? It makes sense. And with the data, we try to validate what comes first. Is corruption that is affecting growth, or growth that is affecting corruption? If it's growth that is affecting corruption, we call it reverse causality because we are looking at the other way around, right? But it could also be that they form a cycle that one simultaneously affect the other. Right? We are poor, that's why we are corrupt, but this corruption also makes us more poor and it traps us in this cycle. So this would be the bi-directional causality or simultaneity that we call in the paper. And we try to validate whether this is a cycle by doing something that the MMM also does, that is, well, let's include legged variables of corruption and growth in this regression to see whether past values of each variable affect the variable that we're assessing. And then we apply a Granger causality test that many people have heard about. Granger, like basically he came up with a test that a layperson would interpret as, well, let's check whether the cause came before the effect. Right? Makes sense. And we find out that yes, it's cyclical, like those two things reinforce each other. And there are also some mechanisms through which we remain poor. Like people don't want to invest in this country because we are corrupt, and we call those the mechanisms, how one thing flows to the other.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, you did touch upon, MMM, market mix modeling, that's been our bread and butter. And one of the funny examples of, simultaneity is that, you advertise more, and because of that, your sales increases. And now you think that, hey, sales has increased because of advertising and marketing. Let me put more money into marketing. So, it's a two-way simultaneity, right? Robson, I noticed that, you have varied experience, right? You have worked in marketing, product management, banking, and, those loyalty programs. So I want to, pick your brain and, ask you about each of these domains, how causal methods have been applied. So let's start with, marketing. What typical causal methods have you applied in marketing?
In marketing, there are a range. I'm going to start by the least robust one.
Mm-hmm.
That is when you try to measure a campaign that is nationwide. So
Mm-hmm.
you only operate in Brazil and you advertise on television and everybody saw it. So as you said, the bread and butter of your company is working with this tool, this
Triple M,
marketing
yeah.
assessment tool. Yes. And ours is basically having a control group to compare. So when someone
Okay.
comes out and say, hey, we launched a campaign for the whole country. So there is no control group. What should I do? Unfortunately, there are some methods that, okay, they need really rigorous hypotheses to hold for them to be able to bring causal estimates. Uh, but they are basically you apply a time series model up to the point that the campaign was launched. So you get a sense how things would continue
Mm-hmm.
in the following days after this launch, and you can
Mm-hmm.
predict it. So when you predict what would have happened in the absence of the campaign, you basically build a counterfactual, and you can compare it with what really happened. So
Mm-hmm.
on one side is what would have happened. On the other side is what really happened. And supposedly the difference between those two values is going to be the incrementality that you generate by the campaign. So this is one of the applications. Uh, there are
This is very
also,
similar to DID. Of course, we'll talk more about this, but I think this is very similar to DID. I know you didn't mention the assumptions, but I know you will get to that in the future segment here.
sure. Uh, the DID also tries to create a counterfactual in a different manner. And we also use it in marketing when, for instance, some people consume the campaign that is not nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
Like someone saw our campaign on YouTube, but somebody else that had access to YouTube didn't see our campaign. And we can measure the incrementality generated on sales on based on this guy like Venkat saw and a guy that is similar to Venkat didn't see. Uh, did this campaign really make Venkat go there to the website and buy something? So this is also one of the tools. And of course, when we can, we experiment. And it's easier to experiment in some channels more than others, like in known channels such as push, email, and so on. It's easier to experiment. But when you want to experiment in out of home, for instance, like outdoors,
Mm-hmm.
and well, uh, the company wouldn't let us data scientists randomize in which airports we are going to put advertised because it may hurt, it may lead to less revenue that would have, so yeah, well, there is a range of tools going from some like time series that is less rigorous to others that is like we randomize who is going to receive or to have access to this campaign and measure whether those guys who received acted more on going to the website and buying something than the other guys.
Yeah, you touched upon an interesting point, randomization, right? I have also, interviewed a lot of epidemiologists. For them, RCTs are their mainstay. They use RCTs more than, our quasi-causal methods. But we are in the field of, marketing and, economics, where we don't have the liberty or the luxury of using, RCTs for various reasons. For example, there could be you cannot control for a lot of factors, right? For example, you give the example of OOH. You can have it, but what is the guarantee that one person who saw OOH in one particular city did not go and travel to another city and saw the same OOH, thereby polluting the control group, right?
Exactly.
Uh, so, how difficult do you think it is to apply RCTs in marketing? And do you think quasi-causal methods are much better for various reasons in marketing?
I see. I believe it will depend on many factors. Like for instance, if your core media spending is not like something as television or social media that you don't want to spend money with Meta, Google, and so on, TikTok doing conversion lifts, Your focus is on optimizing own channels, and we have this capability. Not that we are going to do this, but we have the luxury, as you said, of having an own channel. Many companies don't have a large own channel. Like we have millions of consumers that we can send messages and so on. But if this is the case, experimenting would be easier because we're focusing on things that are under your control, right? But usually big companies don't, or medium companies don't operate like this. They want to know whether like performance media is performing really well and it's worth, and we have a great ROAS and so on. And well, I don't know if you saw this paper. Like I don't know, you have heard of Ron Kohavi, like the
Yes, yes.
experimentalist and so on. He shared a paper that well, those experiments of conversion lift by some providers, they are not really random. So the conclusions that you take from them shouldn't like feed your MMM or your insights like this. So well, I think it's really context dependent. I ended up giving no clear answer to you, but I believe
No,
that
no.
MMM should be a case by case approach. And I think that's what the companies, I'm supposing that companies such as yours, go to the client to investigate what is the framework, what is happening in terms of a strategy to provide this kind of insight. So I wouldn't be able to see to point out is this one better? Is this other better?
No, I kind of agree with Ron Kohavi. In fact, long before his paper, I had, written something similar on LinkedIn. But a lot of people, kind of disagreed with me when I said that, hey, you know what, the experiments that we kind of do in marketing, they are not RCTs technically because you cannot control for a lot of factors. But then once Ron Kohavi's paper came, which kind of, vindicated my point, people are like, oh yeah, Venkat was right. We unnecessarily, scolded him. But yeah, that's a topic for another day anyways. You also seem to have experience with respect to triple M market mix modeling, right? Technically what we say is that it is one of the holistic process to carry out if you're trying to measure the marketing effectiveness, because it tries to control for a lot of factors, right? For example, you can include TV spends, you can include TikTok spends, you can also include macroeconomic variables, you can include price, and see all of them's effect on your KPI. I really feel that experiments are very useful, but experiments sometimes measure only one particular variable, right? Uh, so what has been your experience with respect to MMM? And I know in one of your posts you did talk about the feeling that MM does not capture long-term effects. So what according to you is a long-term, and what would you like MM to do?
I see. But first of all, I have this opportunity of working with MMM
Hmm.
because there was a third-party provider
Hmm.
providing MMM to my previous company. And the internal team was like, well, we don't understand how it works behind the scene. Let's bring you that specialized in econometrics and so on to help us.
Hmm.
So I continue to be a person that knows econometrics and statistics.
Hmm.
I'm not a person who is a specialist in marketing and like all the background knowledge you need to do
Okay.
this. So I'm trying to be humble here in the sense that this is my opinion from outside. But I like MMMs. I think that they are the way to go, especially for the future with these questions of privacy and cookies and so on. Uh, Not only because you lose data from other approaches such as uh, multi-point attribution and so on, but also because it's the only way that we have now to consider everything together, right?
Yeah.
But there is a lot of things that we need to define in a specific terminology because for you what long term might be is different, maybe different from what it is for me that I have a training on econometrics. And in time series long term effects would be like you suffer an intervention and then you measure whether or not there is a stable change in your outcome variable based on that. I believe that from the time series sense the MMM does not do it,
Mhm.
but from other sense, if your model includes like carryover effects, for instance, in lagged variables, you can get like the effects of your spending now, considering that you are in a given level of spending on your past, right? So like, okay, I'm spending $1,000 now, but I spent $1 billion before. It's not the same thing as spending $1,000 now if I spent $50 before. That's what I see on models such as Robin. That's my experience. But probably on your background, like on how your models work, you also might have included the notions of long-term effects that come from the time series references. So it's not like that MMM doesn't do it. It's like the MMM I had access to, I don't believe it does.
Okay, understood. I think I'm totally with you, and I totally agree, right? I mean, there is the plain vanilla MMM, which people, just build out without, baking in ad stock, which you talked about. If you don't have ad stock, you're totally right. You're not trying to measure the previous advertising effects, in the present. And of course, there is also going to be carryover effect. The advertising that you do today will have a lingering effect tomorrow. Of course, you need to, consider all of them into your MM model. And of course, once you do all of this, again and again, there is this concept known as base in MMM, which kind of measures all the historic activities that you've done, all the historic advertising and your brand's longevity. It kind of gets captured there, and that kind of gives an indication of your long-term brand effects. But yeah, I'm happy that we are all on the same page.
Okay.
I thought that you kind of referred to an MM which did not, which actually had stock effect and yet did not, measure the long-term effect. But I think you explained it very beautifully. What I believe is that MM plus experiments are a really healthy way to go about measuring marketing effectiveness. And sometimes you cannot. I mean, we have written a paper that these two are like oil and water. No matter what you do, you cannot mix it together, in the sense that you cannot use, experiments result and feed it into MM, and it doesn't really make sense. But at the same time, once you have the MM, because it encompasses a larger number of variables, you can use MMM's results to inform, certain things about experiments. But we will talk about, that later. Just a curious question. You did, have some experience with MM. Did you use a Bayesian technique or a frequentist technique?
Okay. First, I'm really curious. Maybe it's a talk for a coffee. We after with the interview, the chat, we get a coffee and talk about those topics. But I'm really curious about your concept now about of long-term effects. If it's the baseline that you're considering, like, okay, we built all of this reputation here, and
Mhm.
it counts as an asset,
Mhm.
or if it's another concept. Feel free to discuss it now, or we can discuss it later. But I like engaging in this. Like
Yeah,
I'm
we can
learning
carry
here.
on.
As I said, I came here without this knowledge, and I'm going to leave it here with this topic to think about.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of think of base or the brand equity of an MM kind of like a stored up energy. Think of it like as a battery which has been charged. So to keep charging your battery, you need to supply it energy, electricity. And advertising is something like that, right? You keep doing, and the brand keeps, reaping the rewards of your advertising. And because a lot of people know about you, they purchase your product, they develop goodwill towards you, and because of all that, your company continues to grow, and it is alive. That is the longevity. The more you're alive, for example, I can give examples of Coca-Cola, McDonald's. There are so many companies that are nearly 100 years old, right? They have been there for so long, and they have been advertising also for so long. So now if they kind of switch off any advertising, they will still get somewhat similar levels of sales that they are experiencing even now. That is predominantly because they have advertised in the history for so much, and also they have developed this goodwill for so much. And MMM's base kind of captures that effect. What we have seen from our practice is that brands that are really old, when I say old, I mean to say that 50 plus years, they have a base, somewhere to the tune of 60% or even 75%, in that range. But of course, if you go towards 90% or something, that is not a realistic MMM. That's more like an overfit MMM. I have talked about it, in my Substack as well. But that is the answer to your question. What does base convey? Did I answer your question, or do you want me
Yeah,
to
yes, yes.
elaborate more?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm missing now your question about Bayesian versus
No, no.
frequentist,
My
right?
curious question was, did you use a Bayesian MMM or a frequentist MMM? Or maybe you didn't know. That's also fine. No problem at all.
Yeah, I use them. I mean, Robin is said to be a mix of both because it uses some part of frequentist econometrics and some part of Bayesian. But
Mhm.
let's say it's less Bayesian than approaches such like lightweight MMM or Meridian.
Mhm.
So if I'm in this spectrum, I would say
Okay.
Robin is a frequentist approach.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I happen to work with this because Meta was the provider of the company I worked with, and they gave us a training and so on. And at that point, it seemed to work really better than the one the third party provider was using, and made sense for me to stay with it. But so that said, I don't have an opinion that is based on my use of each one, but I
Understood.
have an opinion about the concept of each one. Like for me, it could be because I'm ignorant about the topic and I need to study and it's on my study list. But I see that the Bayesian approach, in some applications at least, it is kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because it's great for you to include in a model prior knowledge. If you know how things work in reality, like you have a
Mhm.
God view of society and how it works, it's amazing to be there and say, hey, it works like this. So you don't need to check a lot of data. I'm going to tell you the structure and how it works. But on the other side, if you come up with an opinion like the Egyptians did, and you say, hey, like we must please the gods to have a fertile next year, and your priors are wrong, you are going to get biased results. But again, I'm saying it out of like my opinion. I would need to dig deeper and compare both in order to be able to go on LinkedIn and say, hey, I don't believe in this one, I believe in this other one.
Yeah, I do it all the time, and I also get a lot of brickbats from the Bayesians. I don't like Bayesian methods for various reasons. I've written tons about it, but yeah, if I start talking about it, we would need at least 3 hours. But for the want of time, I'll skip that. Let's talk more about linear regression, right? That has been a staple for econometrics. It is a staple for us as well for in market modeling, as you understand. It's an advanced form of linear regression, but still the foundations are linear regression. And when you talk about causal inference methods, we leverage a lot of regressions. How important do you think linear regression is when it comes to causal inference methods?
That's perfect. Uh, OLS is
Mhm.
basically the working horse for all way, especially us that like I call myself as an applied econometrician or applied microeconometrician.
Mhm.
And well, for us, it's really fine to use OLS. And it's not because OLS is the best tool, but it's because it's the best among the simplest tool, right?
Mhm.
Uh, One coefficient of the OLS would give me the interpretation that by how much Y increases, like sales increase, for instance, if I increase $1 spent on TikTok ads, all
Mhm.
else constant, like conditional expectations. And this is great. This is what we need at the end of the day, right? If all assumptions are met that the features are exogenous and so on, those coefficients would be causal. The problem is that we don't meet the assumptions for causal inference only with OLS. So then we go to regression discontinuity design that exploits like small bandwidths in which people or subjects, whatever, are similar, and it fits an OLS to estimate the difference in outcome between those two groups. But regression discontinuity design uses OLS, like the two-way fixed effect approach that we used before and call it the difference in difference that changed a lot in the last decade was estimated via OLS. The two-stage least square with instrumental variables is like a tweak of using OLS. So it worked for us. It was simple enough for us to indoctrinate the students since their undergrad, but it does not do a good job in estimating heterogeneous effects, for example. Like you're not going to estimate 50 or 500 separate OLS regressions to get a sense of how different people react to a treatment. So now we are migrating to other methods of machine learning, like double machine learning or causal random forest, that can give us a sense on heterogeneous treatment effects. And also they take care of things that OLS didn't take, that are non-linear or complex relations between multiple variables. OLS doesn't do a good job unless you use a fully saturated model, which means like interacting all the regression, the variables and so on. So we are migrating for this, and people are giving fancy names such as causal AI, causal machine learning, but the thing is the same. You still need to meet the same hypothesis you needed for OLS. But now it's going to be a bit easier to meet those hypotheses. That's the same. There's not like, let's say that double machine learning and OLS are frameworks, but the identification methodologies, they are RDD, difference in differences, and so on, in which you can apply those frameworks. So you can run a different diff with OLS or with double machine learning. I don't know if you get
Understood.
this. So OLS works. It's simple. It's great. We are trying to move to something fancier, but don't let this fancier setup fool you. We still need to meet the requirements.
Yeah, so basically the foundations are still, the OLS and linear regression. OLS is a method to fit any linear regression method. Yeah, but yeah, so these basis is needed. On top of that, as you rightly said, you can add, random causal forest. You can also add causal ML, and I think that is the, enhancement rather than a core component. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I think it's an enhancement, moving from OLS to double machine learning when you need, when it's needed, when it makes sense. It's an enhancement. But again, you still need to meet a lot of requirements, most of them the same you needed to meet with OLS to achieve to a causal interpretation at the end of the day.
Great. So Robson, let's move to experimentation. You work for Mercado Libre. From my research, what I gleaned is that they are kind of like Amazon plus PayPal for South America. Am I right on that?
Yes, we have,
Okay.
please, sorry, I interrupted
No,
you.
no. I just want to get a clarification because I could be wrong. I just want to get a view of what this company is. Of course, I've heard about them, but I didn't know what they are into. Some people. One of my friend from Brazil told me that they are like Amazons of the world, but now they also have some kind of a payment and all that. So I thought maybe they're like Amazon plus PayPal. I don't know.
Yes, Amazon Plus, let's say, uh, in various extents, a bank. In some
Sorry.
countries, we don't have in various extents, we are also a bank. But
Okay.
in some countries, you have to have a license to operate as a bank.
Mhm.
So we are not a bank for the whole Latin America. But for some countries, we also offer credit. So you can go there and take a line of credit. You have a credit card, you have a debit card, you have an account, and you can buy insurances and so on. So
Yeah, understood. Now things are clear for me. So because you have carried out so many experiments, I believe you must have carried out at least 100 experiments. My question is regarding hypothesis framing. I think everything starts from there for experimentation. Uh, how important is hypothesis framing first of all? Who decides it? Can you just walk us through the process?
sure. This is the hardest part of all,
Hmm.
is having clarity of what you want to measure.
Hmm.
And we don't have any training for this in the beginning. So it comes with, at least in the PhD course, the
Hmm.
hypotheses are clear for us because we read a lot of papers and we derive hypotheses from someone who came before and so forth. But in business, it doesn't help if you measure the wrong thing. So you must go there with your stakeholders and say, not exactly what do you want to measure, but what question do you want to answer? And why is it important? Because sometimes people think they need to answer something, but what they need, in fact, is something else. So, for instance, let's see, someone comes up and says, well, I want to measure the effect of getting a credit line with us. Okay, but it's incomplete. Effect over what? I understand that your treatment is going to Mercado Pago and asking for a credit, but effect on what? Effect on, I don't know, buying with us and the marketplace. But are you sure that you want to measure how important it is getting credit for someone just to buy in the marketplace? Aren't there other things that are important too? For instance, if Venkat comes to Brazil and his first bank is Mercado Pago and he opens an account and gets some credit, isn't it important to know whether he's going to keep using this credit, this account? Or if Robson, who lives here for 30 something years, does the same, isn't it important to know whether he took money from new bank and started putting it on Mercado Pago and so on? So in these types of conversation in which you try to align the demand of this person with the commerce priorities that are defined by the CEO and so on and so forth, you start getting a sense of what is important to move the business. Like not necessarily we want to have an improvement in one specific KPI that is not actionable. Like, okay, you got a credit there. Am I going to keep begging you to use this money to buy within the platform? Or it's more important that this money use it for something else that keeps you with us, loyal with us in Mercado Pago. So everything is like a therapy session with stakeholders trying to discover what they really need to take action for decision making afterwards.
Yeah, a lot of quotable quotes just from this short segment. You said that there is no training for hypothesis framing. Wow, that's really great. I'm going to steal that one. And a session with stakeholders is like a therapy session. I totally understand. I know I've experienced it so many times, and I'm totally with you on that. Again, another quotable quote, definitely. Maybe you can have these quotes for your book. Just an idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So talking about experiments, right? There are a lot of concepts and technicalities involved. There is this problem of, peaking, right? If you would like to, briefly explain to our viewers, what is this peaking problem and how can people avoid it?
Sure. Uh, there are basically two ways of doing an experiment. Well, there are thousands of ways of doing an experiment, but let's go to the traditional framework. You can go there to your Python or R and calculate, okay, if the effect I'm trying to measure is of this size, how many people I need in the whole experiment to be able to measure this difference between the two groups, doing a power calculation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there is this fixed sample approach in which I calculate like I need 100,000 people. And then I launch the experiment and I let it, and I wait for it to achieve 100,000 people in the audience. And then I measure the effects of this intervention between those two groups. But if Venkat is my stakeholder and he is really anxious because he promised to his boss that this feature that he came up with is going to be revolutionary, Venkat is going to send an email as Slack message to me every day asking, hey, can you check the effect for today? I'm going to say, hey, Venkat, we launched the experiment yesterday. Should I be looking at the result? I said, yeah, okay. And tomorrow we do the same. And we do the same. And to the point that I say, okay, I'm going to build a dashboard for us to check the results every day. The problem with this is that you are testing different hypotheses separately for the same process without adjusting for the fact that it's basically coming from the same data, but you are trying and trying again at your will up to the point that for chance, it could be that a positive result that pleases Venkat appears and he says, see, I told you that this was a great feature. So we don't need more experience, just kill it, and I'm going to report this last result. And Venkat just did something that pleases stakeholders and everyone, but that is statistically wrong because we had to account for the fact that those were repeated tests, right? So basically, this is peaking, and this is the problem of peaking. Peaking is trying to check along the way. And to solve peaking, fortunately, it's not a practice that we developed here, but the platform, I'm not going to take credit for it. The platform existed before I came in. called Melidata. We have excellent data scientists and data engineers. They created a platform that Robson and Venkat are not going to be able to launch their own experiment the way they want. They are going to be able to set parameters like I need to check this KPI, this is the size of effect I expect, and so on. The platform made by statisticians and data scientists is going to design the experiment and run it using something that we call sequential testing. Sequential testing does basically what Venkat proposed, but taking care of the fact that looking today, testing today, looking tomorrow, testing tomorrow, you can take every test that you did, but you have to correct for the fact that they were made together. And there are some margins, like some thresholds that, yes, if the result that Venkat said was the best, just was above this threshold, then it's valid because we are confident enough that this result is not because we are picking. It's more robust to the fact that we checked in several days. And this platform already experiments it, or already implements this. But also, the platform can't do every type of experiment. For instance, I needed to design myself with a partner an experiment that, well, if someone has a bad experience in the platform, this guy got a broken package and wrote a bad review, this guy should receive a reward. And we needed to experiment it. And we need to experiment it for several months, like 3 months or more. The platform didn't allow for that. And I couldn't build a sequential testing algorithm myself. So you can go back to the fixed sample approach, that is the traditional one, and say, hey, Venkat, shake my hand and agree that we are not going to pick. We are just going to see at the end of the defined period that we calculated how the results are going to be. So those two approaches, they avoid the problem of picking.
Yeah, I mean, last year I traveled to Dubai and I met this, really famous experimenter. I don't want to take his name, but he said that, you can peak all you want, but don't make any actions. I think, yeah. So I think he said something like, yeah, you can peak all you want, but don't take any actions, then you're fine. So I think that's fine as long as you can see what is happening, but don't, actively try to stop an experiment or, do some hanky-panky things like that. I think you should be fine. Yeah. Uh, so
Sounds great. It's another quote for the book.
yeah, please feel to use it. Yeah. Uh, yeah. As a econometricians, you must have come across a lot of DAGs, directed acyclic graphs. Generally speaking, I've seen that econometricians do not have a favorable view towards DAGs, but epidemiologists, they have a great regard for it. Where do you stand? Do you think DAGs are good? Because I have seen DAGs being abused sometimes, where some shady vendors, they will say that, hey, look, we have constructed a DAG and we have proved causality. For me, it is just like a hypothesis framing exercise rather than a causality proving exercise. What's your take on that?
Okay. That's a hard one because it's kind of a religion, right? Some people see causal approach as a religion. This is something that I intend to put on the book on the last chapters. That, hey, this is my view on causality because I was indoctrinated by economists and econometricians that think like this. But there are those other approaches as well, and they serve for those specific objectives, right? So in economics, in econometrics, there are the structural economists. They get a model, they say, okay, like what is the relationship between unemployment and inflation and blah, blah, blah. And they make equations to explain this, and they estimate the relations in those equations using data. This is not doing the DAG, but in some cases, this could be translated to a DAG. So it's not a technology that we aren't aware of it. But for us that are not structural econometricians, this serves, at least the DAG that translates the equation serves to indicate what we want to measure and for us to have clarity of the backdoors and like the types of bias that we could have. So now, and I think we didn't use DAGs before simply because it was from another field and we didn't know a lot about it. But now we have, for example, the causal inference mixtape from Scott Cunningham. There is a chapter on that. The effect from Nick Huntington Clay. Also, the two books from Mateus Facuri, the open source one and the one on Python also have. So I think we are moving to this. I saw, but I agree with you. It's so rare that when a paper was published in American Economic Review, which is a top tier journal for economists, and it had a DAG, it became like a Twitter post showing, hey, we economists are. So yes, it's not prevalent, but we are moving towards it because it helps us illustrate and clarify to others what we want to measure and what are going to be the caveats that we expect in measuring this. But for me, I won't take the DAG and say, I'm going to estimate this structure. Most of the time, I'm going to estimate what we call reduced form effects, because I'm not putting the mediators in the middle of the equation and so on and so forth. So at least for me, talking by myself, I have a long way to go in between translating DAGs into the equations I'm estimating. If ever I'm going to do this, I don't know. I don't know if I need this, but I need them to clarify for me and for stakeholders what is the question I want to answer, what is the problem I face, trying to answer it directly without a causal approach, and so on.
Understood.
Yeah,
that was perfect. That was
satisfactory?
perfect. I think that we went into great depths. That was really insightful. Robson, we also, talked about, counterfactuals earlier in the segment, right? I personally believe counterfactuals are really important to prove causality. But there is, the other camp which says that, hey, you know what? Counterfactuals at the end of the day are, counterfactuals. You can never really prove them, right? But I feel that sometimes, the assumptions that you make for various causal inference methods kind of gives you a little bit of legitimacy to say that, hey, you know what, counterfactuals are indeed, true. What's your opinion on this? Do you think counterfactuals, can be proved, or do you think, we will have to take the help of, assumptions to, really bring in legitimacy to, counterfactuals?
That's an excellent question, and I think it should be discussed more, because people sometimes feel free to say, no, this is the counterfactual for that. But no, this is the comparison group that you came to find in your way, but not necessarily is the counterfactual. The counterfactual is an imagination exercise in which you see Venkat here and Venkat at the same time in a different situation under a different intervention, right? And this is basically described in the Rubin model as the fundamental problem of causal inference. Like for me, just this expression, it's the fundamental problem. It's basically admitting that there is no way we're going to get that. It's just an idea to be pursued. Like it's the holy grail that we must have as a compass, like what we are looking for in this study. But by construction, maybe I'm being ignorant here, but by construction, I believe that it's not possible to give legitimacy to the counterfactual. But as I was telling to a junior data scientist here, talking about causal inference, there's this point in which an estimate is completely bullshit, and there is this point in which an estimate is the holy grail of causal inference, is the very exact causal effect of an intervention. And our goal when we think about counterfactuals is to be closer to this one than to that one, knowing that we are never going to be with this one in our hands. So I think it's more of a moral compass than of something that we aim to achieve.
Understood. I think that was a great example. Talking about assumptions, right? I play this game with everybody. It is called the Rate the Causal Methods Assumptions game. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you all the various causal methods assumptions, and I'm going to ask you to rate the assumptions in the realm of, is it possible, impossible, or totally not possible. So let's kickstart this game, and I'll explain it to you.
That's good.
I hope you can see my screen.
Let me maximize it here. I do.
Okay, so let's start with, DID's parallel trends assumptions. Do you think that assumption is reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible? Of course, you are free to take up, any example from any domain. It could be marketing, it could be banking, or it could be even, from econometrics, social sciences. What, according to you, has been your experience, whether, DID's parallel trends is a reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible assumption?
Okay. Uh, can I first hedge myself, explain my line of thinking before choosing?
Yeah. I forgot to
Okay.
say that. Yes, please always have a explanation
Okay.
that is always adding more context. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
That's a great exercise. I mean, I don't know if you teach some courses, but if you do, you should do this exercise
I
in
do. Yeah, this is
your student.
coming up from there itself. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, say parallel trends in differences, it basically comes from the counterfactual idea that if I could see the trajectory of the control group after this period in which the treatment group is treated, I would see that they continue in a let's say smooth trajectory. There's no change. Otherwise, the effect I'm estimating for the treatment would be biased because I'm assuming something would be constant towards time, like increasingly constant throughout time, if the other one would be suffering an effect. But no, the control group, for instance, is decreasing for some other reason. So it's a violation of something I cannot see, right? And for this reason, the only indirect test is looking for the past. Since I cannot look for the counterfactual or for the potential outcome of the control group in the other direction, I look back and say, hey, before the treatment, was there parallel trend? And for me, given this limitation, I think it's a reasonable assumption
Okay.
because, first of all, if it's not reasonable, we are not going to achieve identification,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Sure.
also there is the relative factor here that there are other ones that are more unreasonable than that. So in this scale, I'm going to put it there.
Great. Uh, let's move on to synthetic control methods, synthetic twin. Of course, you can give a brief background or an explanation, and then give your rationale. Yeah, please go ahead.
Synthetic control, synthetic twin. Venkat, I think you're going to see that I'm an economist because I say that everything depends of something else, right? I never have a clear attribution, but
No problem. Yeah.
I think this one is reasonable
Mm-hmm.
in some situations. It suffers from some of the issues that parallel trend suffers as well, because parallel trends and synthetic twin, they are based also, like the validation, since we don't see the counterfactual, is based on the previous period. Like, okay, did I build a synthetic twin that follows the same path? Okay, I did. Is it perfect? Yes, as long as after the treatment, this synthetic twin don't suffer the treatment for another intervention and changes its path. Or if the SUTVA, the stable treatment unit value assumption, is valid and the treatment doesn't affect the control. So there are a lot of problems here that we can't defend ourselves unless we are God and know all the context of Earth and know that the control group was not affected by other situations and so on and so forth. But if they hold, yeah, it's reasonable. But we are less sure about this and we have less ways of defending this than we have the ones for parallel trends. So I
Yep.
must put it under unreasonable. Like if I have to trust my life in those two, I think that parallel trends would be in a higher level than the
Yeah,
synthetic gene.
I'm with you on that. And all the causal experts that I've spoken to, they also echo, what you have expressed here, in the sense that at least with parallel trends, there is a realistic counterfactual. But in SEM, you kind of concord a counterfactual or a control group, which is not even realistic. It's a hodgepodge of all the other, control groups, right? So yeah, I am with you on that. Since you talked about Sattva, I know its label says biostats and econometrics. Sorry, because it was the I had previously another one. You can have it as marketing or econometrics. Yeah.
Let's
What do you
go.
think of? Yeah.
Suitable is reasonable.
Okay.
Also under various situations. If they were, for instance, you look at this hypothesis and say it's always reasonable, then you never need to make indirect tests to validate it because, well, there's no worry. So it's not a hypothesis, it's a fact, right? In this sense, the suitable is reasonable because under specific circumstances that in some of the scenarios are under control of the experimenter, you can let's avoid the word guarantee, but try to guarantee the suitable. For instance, okay, let's do an experiment in two cities, and one of them is far away from another, and I'm giving a treatment at the individual level, and I'm measuring the outcomes at the individual level. And I'm pretty sure that these individuals in those two really far from each other regions, they are not going to interact. And at the end of the day, I'm also supposing that they are balancing in all other covariates, the two municipalities are similar and so on. In a scenario like this, which I'm making like an extreme scenario, but we could think of something more reasonable, Sutro would be valid, right?
So can I put it under reasonable?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. I know you have a lot of experience with the regression discontinuity design. What do you think about the sharp cutoff rule in RED?
Okay. Again, I love this method. I think it applies well in a lot of situations in industry as well,
Mhm.
right? And if you know that if someone crosses this cutoff, this person is going to be either in one group or the other. Like if you
Mhm.
cross this cutoff, you're going to be in the treatment, never in the control, because you receive a drug and then you take this drug and everything else, like you are full complier. Well, it works for me, right?
Mhm.
And so what I'm saying here is like, first of all, the assignment rule is binding. Being on one side or the other guarantees access to a group. Uh, the other point is that there's no manipulation. For instance, when people do geographics, RDD, and they say, oh, this municipality, Recife, where I live, is a treated municipality, and Olinda, a nearby, is a control. Okay, let's do a geographic RDD, but suddenly a guy says, hey, I pay rent. I can choose to live on the other side and get treated as well. So you are contaminating the treatment group. And there's self-selection anyway. So you are not clear from bias. And the whole goal of causal inference is basically clearing biases. So if those assumptions hold, sharp RDD is going to be reasonable. And there are a lot of indirect tests as well, right?
Yeah,
To
yeah.
check the validity of this.
Yeah, so now
And
we come
now
to the final one, perfect balancing in, propensity score matching. What's your opinion on that?
you already know my opinion. I'm sure that you know where I'm going to assign this one.
Yeah, just for the benefit of the audience. Of course, I know, but yeah, you can, please.
Yes,
Yeah.
I like propensity score matching. It serves for a lot of things. It serves for you to do better things than just getting a matching for Robson, a guy that you think is similar to me, and just run a regression on the sample. You can use propensity score matching to apply weighting, for instance. Like
Mhm.
Mateus has an excellent chapter in his book about weighting. So I like it. I use it. I have to admit that I use it in some situations when there is nothing else that would help me adjust uh, the differences between groups. But I'm aware that there's always something else left from the model, right?
Mhm.
First of all, even if you use the most advanced deep learning methodology to estimate the propensity scores, it could be the case that you are forgetting or simply don't observe a variable that affects both the outcome and your treatment. and the effect might be biased by this omitted variable. So impossible is not unuseful, right? But I'm going to assign it to impossible.
Okay, impossible. Okay.
I'm curious about, I don't know if you can say it because you might contaminate your next interviewees, but I'm curious about how you would classify those.
Yeah, I would put it somewhere in between reasonable and unreasonable. But yeah, I mean, I respect your opinion, and you have given a great explanation on why you think so. So yeah, you can stand with it. But yeah, this has been great, and we can move to the next section. Uh, I'll just stop sharing my screen. Yeah. So a last few questions remain. There is this talk about, how do you evaluate causal models, right? It's pretty easy to evaluate any machine learning models, especially the forecasting ones, where you have the ground truth and then the predicted value. You kind of, see the difference, how close they are or how divergent they are, and you can just say that, yeah, the model is good or bad. But with respect to causal methods, it's very dicey, right? How do you kind of, evaluate causal methods?
Yes, there are various ways. There are, I don't know what do you mean by validating? For instance, if someone came up to me with a model, right, that this person developed, and it was the case here in Mercado Livre, like a consultancy firm developed a model to try to measure effects, and they were pretty confident about it. What I did was to simulate data. Basically, I generated data in a structure that was similar to the data we had for our clients and introduced some relations between treatment and the outcome and treatment and those variables. And with this fake data that I created, I fed the model. And as you might expect, if the model is really well designed in trying to measure causal inference, the value it would spit on the other side, output as a causal estimate, should be approximately the value that I simulated in my data as the causal effect, and the model didn't.
Okay.
So, well, there's something wrong here that you are trying to explore probabilistic matching and weighting and everything at the same time, calling it causal AI, but it's not it doesn't give us an unbiased estimator. That's how I would validate. But if you ask me, how would you validate, for instance, that an RDD estimate is robust enough? Okay, we don't have counterfactuals to validate that this is unbiased, but we can explore some like engineering to provide credibility to our stakeholders.
Mhm.
First of all, I would check this, like, are people able to cross the cutoff? Like, are our clients, for instance, if we determine a score, a loyalty score for those guys, they don't know how this score is based, but people are hung on more loyal or less loyal in terms of engagement. And we create a cutoff, and for the guys above this cutoff, we give discounts and I don't know, free streaming and so on. Are they going to be able to self-select into a group or the other around this cutoff? Well, we can test it. Are there more people on one side than the other? Is the distribution discontinuous around this? Are those people similar or balanced in terms of characteristics such as gender, age, how much they access the app every day or weekly, on socioeconomic background and so on? Okay, yeah, they are balanced. Like, if I try different bandwidths in my estimate, is the effect going to change a lot? No, it doesn't. So with those exercises, and they are like robustness exercise, falsification exercise, they are not confirmation exercise. What they're trying to say is, hey, I'm trying to destroy your results, and they remain stable to some extent. Let's move on with this insight. Are you confident to move on with this insight? The causal inference is basically like this. It's about reducing uncertainty on the insight that I'm generating for you to take action. It's not about giving you certainty.
Understood.
So yeah, that's how. I
Yeah, I
mean,
think
pardon, sorry. there are analogous falsifications and robustnesses for instrumental variables, for RCTs, for diff in diff. I just told RDDs, but for each one, there is a set of exercises for you to come to your stakeholder. Hey, Venkat, see, those are the results that I tried to stress test all of them and destroy them, and they are here holding up.
Yeah, I think this was a great explanation. I think the audience have got a clear understanding of, how to evaluate causal methods. The last question is, a lot of people are trying to, break into causal inference. So, it's becoming more popular as day goes by. What classical books or resources would you suggest for anybody trying to, break into causality?
First of all, the Book of Why.
Mm-hmm.
First, I started reading. Actually, I love Audible. I love audiobooks.
Mm-hmm.
My office is far away from home, so I get a lot of hours to listen. I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm going to take this 2019 or 18 book and listen on my way. And this
Mm-hmm.
book, I wish I had access to this in my undergrad days
Mm-hmm.
because it helps you think in a philosophical way, an existential way about causality. So it's a great book and it's accessible. You don't need to know about the statistics or whatever. So I would say it's the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a quote that I annotated here that Chilea says, "You cannot answer a question you cannot ask."
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, what was the most difficult part here? Talking to stakeholders, like a therapy session to come to a question that you need to answer. So this book is great. And there are a lot of other books. Uh, Experimentation Works from Stefan Tonk is a
Mm-hmm.
non-technical book that will help people that are watching here and have no background in statistics or causal inference to get to know why causal inference is applied in business.
Mm-hmm.
And the others are Causal Inference, the mixtape, Scott Cunningham. There is a version online free. The Effect, an introduction to research design and causality, Nick Huntington Klein. There is also a free version. I buy these books because I think they're so great that they deserve to be bought. And the books of Mateus Facuri, Causal Inference in Python. This one is not available online, and Causal Inference for the Brave and True, which is available.
Great. I
I
think
mean,
that's an
I could I could say, hey, this is the guy from the like you can see like it's causal inference for statistics and social science from Imbens and
yeah,
Rubin,
guide embeds.
basically
Yeah.
the guys from the counterfactual way of thinking. And well, if you go more advanced, this would be the last one after the ones I just mentioned.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with your selection of books. Of course, there are more classical books out there, like the Mostly Harmless Economics from
Yeah.
Angrist. I think a lot of people have recommended that. I know, but there are so many, but I think you've covered them all. Or you seem to have everything. Yeah. And I will recommend your book too whenever it's out, Causal Inference in Everyday. Yeah. I look forward to
Thank you
your,
very much.
book release very soon. Robson, it has been great. Thanks for your time. And I'm sure, we're going to have you back soon for another talk where we, go into much more deeper topics of causal inference. Of course, we didn't touch upon, causal estimates, causal estimates, ATEs, CATs, etc. In future talks, we will definitely cover them and, perhaps go into much more intricate details with respect to every technique. For example, DID, SEM, PSM. There's so much to unravel, but, 1.5 hours is simply not enough. We will require another segment for that for sure. But thank you, Robson. It's been great. I hope you enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you very much. It was really nice talking to you. Let's keep in touch. Thank you for inviting me. And for those who are watching and listening, please find me on LinkedIn. It's where I met Venkat, and we are always learning. Well, I'm always learning from him. I expect
I
to
learned from you
also
too.
share some kind of knowledge. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Robson. I'll make sure to leave your LinkedIn link in the descriptions, and I'm pretty sure people are going to find this particular talk really useful and insightful. Thanks for your time. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.